Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. On today's tutorial, I will teach you how to sew the jacket lining pieces. Hi, my name is Ayo and welcome to 011 Clothing Tutorials. On this channel, I upload DIYs, pattern drafting and sewing tutorials. If you haven't subscribed yet, kindly do so and do not forget to turn on the notification bell so that you'll be notified whenever I upload a new video. So now let's get right into the tutorial. Thank you. These are the lining pieces for the front and the side panel of the jacket. I will remove the patterns from the fabric. These two pieces are the front lining pieces. There should be a little pleat at this side. I have already notched the pleat positions. I will pin them in place. I will sew the pleats in place on the sewing machine. I will now place the two side panel pieces on the front lining pieces like this, right side to right side. I will pin them in place, matching up the notch points. I will sew them in place using half an inch sewing allowance. I will go ahead and do the stitching now. First, I will stitch down the pleats. Then I will go ahead and sew the front and the side panel pieces together using half an inch sewing allowance. These are the back lining pieces. I will remove the patterns from the fabric. I will place the two back pieces together like this at the center back, right side to right side. I will pin them in place, matching up the notches. There is a pleat at this upper part. I will sew it vertically down from the neckline, just a short distance of 1.5 inches. Next, I will measure and mark out the stitching lines at the center back, which is 1 inch sewing allowance. I will mark the end point of the lower vent on the upper vent. From this end point, I will measure and mark 0.5 inch downwards like this. I will draw a horizontal line. I will sew the center back in place like this, from the neckline down to this point. First, I will sew vertically down from this point to this point. Then I will sew the center back in place from the neckline down to this point. There should still be about half an inch allowance left below the end point of the stitching. I will snip into the corner at this side. And then I will turn the lining on the sewing machine needle so as to sew the upper part of the vent in place. I will now proceed with the sewing. Once I reach the already marked end point of the sewing, I will snip into the corner on just the lower back piece. This is the back piece with the full vent. First, I will ensure that the sewing machine needle is down, that is, it is inserted into the lining fabric. Then I will lift up the presser foot. I will fold this fabric piece out of the way because I have no intention of cutting it. I will snip the lining fabric from this upper corner diagonally to the end point of the stitching. I will clearly draw out what I intend to snip with my ruler and chalk. I will now proceed to snip from this corner to the end point of the stitching. I will now turn the back piece that has the cutout vent on the sewing machine needle like this. I will align the upper edges of the vent very well. I will clearly mark the point where the stitching should end, and this should extend beyond the end point of the cutout vent by 0.5 inch. I will now sew the upper part of the vent in place exactly on this line that I've already drawn out previously. This is what it looks like after sewing. There should be an overlap of exactly 0.5 inch seam allowance that will be used to sew the main fabric in place later on. And this is the tuck at the neckline area. I will press open the center back seam line. I will also press the entire back lining piece. This is what the back lining piece looks like after pressing. This is the pleat at the neckline area. And this is the 0.5 inch overlap that will be used to sew the main fabric in place later on. I will go ahead and press the tiny pleats on the front pieces. I will also press upon the seam allowances. I will also press the entire front and side panel piece. This is what the front and the side panel looks like after pressing them. This is the back piece. I'll place the front pieces on the back piece like this, right side to right side. I will pin them in place. I will sew them in place using 1 inch sewing allowance. I will go ahead and do the stitching now. Now that I've done the stitching, I will press open the seam allowances. With the right sides together, I will pin the front and the back shoulders in place. I will sew the shoulders in place using half an inch sewing allowance. I will not sew all the way to the end. I will leave about 1 inch opening at the end. I will sew the shoulders in place using half an inch sewing allowance. These are the 1 inch openings that I left at the ends. They will be used to fix the jacket facing in place later on. I will press open the shoulder seam allowances. These are the sleeve lining pieces. I will remove the pattern pieces from the fabric. I will place one of the undersleeve pieces on one of the top sleeve piece like this, right side to right side. I will match up the elbow notches at the outer curve of the sleeve. I will pin them together. I will measure and mark out the 1 inch seam allowance along the outer curve of the sleeve. The sewing should end half an inch above the cut out vent. I will measure and mark the half-inch allowance. I will draw out the line. I will repeat the same thing on this other sleeve as well. The top sleeve with the cut out vent has to be on top when marking out the seam allowance. This should be the end point of the stitching at the upper part of the vent. I will mark the points. Actually, the end point of the stitching should extend beyond the cutout vent by 0.5 inch. I will go ahead and do the stitching now, following the guidelines that I've already drawn out on the fabric. Once I reach the end point of the sewing, I will ensure that the sewing machine needle is well inserted into the lining fabric. I will lift up the presser foot. Then I will turn the fabric on the sewing machine needle like this. I will fold this fabric piece out of the way because I have no intention of cutting it. I will snip the lining fabric from the top corner diagonally to the end point of the stitching. I will clearly draw out what I intend to snip with my ruler and chalk. I will now snip from this corner to the end point of the stitching. I will turn the cutout vent of the top sleeve on the sewing machine needle like this. I will align the upper edges of the vent very well. I will now sew the top part of the vent in place exactly on the line that I've already drawn out on the lining fabric previously. Overhanging seam allowance that I have here is more than 0.5 inch. In fact, it is almost 1 inch. The sewing at the upper part of the vent should extend beyond the cutout vent by 0.5 inch. I will extend the sewing from this end point to this point like this, so that the overhanging seam allowance should be exactly 0.5 inch. Now the overhanging seam allowance is now exactly 0.5 inch. This is the vent of the back piece. The overhanging seam allowance is also more than 0.5 inch. This is because when I was sewing, I did not sew beyond the cutout vent by 0.5 inch. I will go ahead and rectify the sewing now. I will measure the 0.5 inch seam allowance from this end of the vent like this. I will now extend the sewing from this point to this point like this. The overhanging seam allowance is now 0.5 inch. This is the two-piece sleeve. I will press open the seam allowance. I will also press the remaining parts of the sleeve. This is the center back vent which I had adjusted slightly. I will press the upper part of the vent where the adjustment was done. This is the sleeve. I have already sewn the outer curve of the sleeve as you can see. I will now fold the sleeve into two equal halves like this. I will pin the inseam in place, matching up the elbow notches. I will sew the seam in place using half an inch sewing allowance. I will do the same thing on this other sleeve as well. I will go ahead and do the stitching now using half an inch sewing allowance. I will repeat the same thing on the second sleeve as well. I will insert the sleeve into the sleeve board like this. I will press open the seam allowance. I will also press the entire sleeve. These are the two sleeve pieces which I have already thoroughly pressed, as you can see. This is the main jacket piece. I will pin the top edge of the undersleeve to the upper edge of the side panel like this, matching up the underarm notches. I will sew the undersleeve in place using half an inch sewing allowance. I have already sewn the upper edges of the undersleeves to the upper edges of the side panel. Using a needle and a thread, I will unstitch 2 rows of gathering stitches on the top sleeve edge. I will slightly gather the upper part of the sleeve edge to fit into the remaining armhole curve. I will measure the remaining armhole curve. This gave me a value of 13 inches. Once I'm done with the slight gathering of the sleeve edge, its length should be equal to 13 inches. With the right sides together, I will align the sleeve edge notch with the shoulder seam line. I will pin it in place. I will sew it in place using half an inch sewing allowance. I will repeat the same thing on this other sleeve as well. I will go ahead and base the sleeve in place first. I will go ahead and do the stitching now using half an inch sewing allowance. I will avoid creating pleats on the sleeve as I sew along. I will remove the basting stitches. I have sewn the 2 sleeves in place. I will go ahead and iron the lining piece around the area where the sleeves were sewn in place. So that's it, guys. I am done with the sewing of the jacket lining. Stay tuned for my next tutorial. If you find this video helpful, do not forget to give it a thumbs up, drop a comment down below, share this video with your friends who are interested in sewing, and do not forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. See you in my next tutorial. Bye, and thank you so much for watching.